Richard Perry Loving, being a white person, and the Mildred Jeter, being a colored person, did unlawfully cohabitate as man and wife.
Richard?
Hey, what?
You have speed.
Joel, we have you playing Richard Loving in Loving.
Mm-hmm.
How was it first hearing about it? Did you hear about it from the documentary or from when they presented the opportunity of playing the role?
Well, Jeff told me about it.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, I've never heard about them. But I'm, Australian, so that made sense. But then I realized not very many Americans, who either weren't young African-American kids who learned about it in school or weren't the children of, an interracial marriage. Because a lot of people who say, oh, this is my mum and dad's story, this is, my grandparents' story, they knew about it. It's such a significant story, and yet it had flown so under the radar. So the first point was Jeff telling me, and then I watched the documentary, and I was like, this is going to be great.
Like, I gotta be in this movie.
I've got to be in it.
I know that the Lovings, they're very reserved and quiet people. And in the film, it shows as well, which I think is great that Jeff incorporated that. But for you and Ruth, how was that having to act with very minimal dialogue?
I thought it was going to be easy, I mean, on a kind of a jokey level, I always said, I didn't have to do any homework the night before. But, the pressure to actually be specific about why they were silent was something very significant, because, when you look at, I think when you look at injustice, you realize, sadly, people learn to shut their mouth because the system or the government or whatever those forces are that are kind of limiting your freedom, you realize, to fight against it is quite dangerous, and to fight against it may create a cost that you don't want to cough up.
Right.
And I think it's sad that injustice breeds silence. So I love that the film is the way it is, because you want people to scream sometimes, you want them to fight, but when you're taught for too long not to, what do? You just kind of surrender and you shut up, and that's very telling.
If the Lovings were to see this film in one word, if you could sum up how you would hope that they would react to it, what would that be?
I would hope that they were happy. I know Richard would be mortified.
Right. Mildred would be, she would love it.
I think Mildred would just be holding Ruth's hand. Richard would be looking at me going, oh, because he wouldn't want to be the center of attention yet again.
And 100 years from now, I know in the film you hear the sentence a lot, you should have known better. You should have known better than to have done what you've done.
Yeah.
100 years from now, what is it that you think collectively as humanity we should have known better?
You know what's really sad? I think it's going to be the same stuff. Mm-hmm. Because we say, oh, this is relevant now. You go, this was relevant in the early 90s in the LA riots. This was relevant in other times, in recent history. It's relevant all the time. It just depends how hot the topic is and how newsworthy it is in comparison to other things. We should always know better about placing value judgment on otherness. And I think that the real pure source, are children who haven't had the education in the negative direction to place the judgment value. So I don't think it's true that kids don't see colour. I think they see it, but they don't make a judgment on it. And that's the neighbourhood that Richard and Mildred grew up in as well. There were people who, they were grown adults who didn't place value judgment on colour. Their commonality was just putting food on the table. And as Richard said, we all looked out for each other. We helped each other.
And I hope that 100 years from now we will be looking out for each other.
Yeah, and I hope so. But one by one, the more and more people who learn that and learn to have empathy and learn to then pass that on to their children. And then we can slowly, as we do, evolve as human beings.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.